The Nashville Predators make the first of what could be several moves ahead of Friday's trade deadline. On today's show, we're going to break down the deal for Gus Nyquist and tell you what it means for Nashville's lineup in the short term. And we got to talk about those back-to-back losses.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this Monday episode shouting out our Locked On Predators insiders and, of course, our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I'm Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio. And friends, I have a partner in crime.
Yes, you do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
Emma, I don't think I've ever been so glad to have a partner in crime because I'm entering this show feeling like I want to burn it down, y'all. Today on the show, the role of the Hocktimus may or may not be picked up and played by Emma Lingen. I don't know. Buckle up. We're going to see what happens.
Won't. It won't. I'll ruin that for you right now. It won't.
It won't. I don't know. We may be without some Hocktimism today. Man, rough hockey weekend. Of course, not a huge surprise over the weekend. The Predators traded forward Gus Nyquist to the Minnesota Wild. We are going to talk about the details of that deal. Emma and I will share with you what we think about the return. We're also going to talk about what this means in the short term for the Predators lineup because, friends, remember, this roster could change again anytime now. And we got to talk about the thing that has taken the Hocktimist right out of me, the back-to-back losses for the Predators over the weekend. Oh, Emma. I said before we started recording, I go into Predators games feeling like Mary Poppins, and recently I finished Predator games feeling like Hannibal Lecter. It's just been rough, y'all. It's rough. But before we get to that, we do need to talk about the Gus Nyquist trade. Of course, Emma, this is something you and I have talked about. We've known this is very likely coming. I think the only way that this would not have happened is if the Nashville Predators were making a playoff run. Then I think they would have hung on to Gus Nyquist. But friends, we knew far too early in the season that wasn't likely. Nyquist traded on Saturday to the Minnesota Wild. In return, the Nashville Predators got a 2026 second-round draft pick. Here's a caveat. The Predators are retaining 50% of Gus Nyquist's salary. Of course, he is on an expiring contract at the end of the year. Emma, when you heard this deal, talk to me about initial reactions, and then talk me through what you think about the return for Nashville. I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Well, I think, at this point, none of us are surprised that Gus was probably going to be the first to go. He's, incredibly valuable player, all things we've said before. I mean, he can play on the left wing. He can play right wing. He can play top six, bottom six. He can play on the power play. He can kill penalties. Like, he can do it all. He has playoff experience, and he's 35 years old on an expiring contract, probably wasn't going to be coming back. The Predators are not a playoff team at this point, so get something for him while you can. Now, that something that I thought they could get for him, I did not think would be as good as what they got. I think the return was fantastic. I think, okay, you're retaining 50% of his salary, but that's just till the end of this year. And then you're done. It's not like that stays on the books. And it's not like the Predators are going to be going out doing any big game hunting at the trade deadline this year. So it's not like they necessarily need that cap space right now. And they got a second round pick for half a season, less than half a season of Gus Nyquist. And yes, it's in 2026, but by all accounts, the 2026 draft class is a much deeper class than the 2025 class, in which they already have 3 first-round picks and I think 2 seconds. So it's like, I don't think they need it anymore in 2025. But I mean, I think that's a huge return. I normally deals like this, like a textbook rental, you get like maybe a 4th round pick for him.
Right.
That's kind of what I was expecting. I'm like, whatever. It's fine. It's something better than letting
Mhm.
him walk in the offseason for literal nothing. And they got a 2nd round pick. Like, that's really, really good.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it helped. And now this is kind of speculation on my part, but rumor was it was more than just the Wild that was kind of interested in Gus Nyquist. And the Wild seemed very interested. Elliot Friedman was saying that they seem to be the most aggressive about it. I think it helps because he's been in Minnesota before. This is not the first time Minnesota has gone after Gus Nyquist as a rental. They know what they're getting. They saw him in the playoffs. I think he played 6 games in the first round for them. And I think it was against Dallas, but that's off the top of my head. Double check me. But he had 5 assists. Like, this is a guy who's going to show up for this team. I do think it probably helped tremendously to bump it up to a 2nd round pick that the Predators retained 50% of that salary. And again, it's an expiring contract. It really hurts Nashville 0 to kind of carry that over. And if it bumps you up to a 2nd round pick than a 4th round pick in, like you said, a draft that has predicted to be a little bit deeper, I was like, okay, now we're talking. I feel bad Ryan O'Reilly is now without one of his Swedish meatballs, but friends, this is what happens when the Nashville Predators F around all season, and now we are at the find out portion of what happens.
You F around and you lose your meatballs. That's what happens.
Again, perfect for the swag store.
If this season has taught us anything, you F around, you lose your meatballs.
You lose your meatballs. You mentioned too, Nashville going into the 2025 draft picks out the wazoo, 3 first round picks, 2 seconds, 2 thirds, 1 fourth, 1 fifth, 2 sixth. None in the 7th round. But in 2026 now they've got 7 picks. They have 2 2nd round picks now with this deal for Nyquist. They don't have a 6th round pick. That one went when we sent Cody Glass to Pittsburgh. I just no words. Sure. Anyway, so I have to agree with you. I think nothing about retaining salary, I think, is a long-term problem for Nashville. I think a 2nd round pick in this 2026 draft definitely worth that instead of a 4th round pick. My question for you, Emma, watching, and again, we're going to dive into the meat, and it's bad meat. It's meat that sat out all night, but we're going to talk about the meat of these 2 losses over the weekend. But just looking at the New York Rangers game, because news broke shortly before the New York Rangers game that, hey, Nyquist out of the lineup for trade-related reasons. And then the Predators just did not win. And we'll leave it at that for now. Come back to the Hannibal Lecter, or the Islanders.
Yes, the Islanders game, but yes.
Yeah. Come back, later in the show for the Hannibal Lecter breakdown of these games. But what did you think? How do you think that may have impacted the Predators? Like, hey, Nyquist pulled out of the lineup right ahead of time. This guy's getting traded. Hey, by the way, he's one of your great friends.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has an effect. I think I may have told this story before, but it's something that I will never forget, truly, because it was so impactful. But when I was on the road with the team in the 22-23 season, that was the crazy season. David Poile announced he was retiring. Barry Trotz was taking over. Everyone got hurt. And then everyone who wasn't hurt got traded, and then they, bring up the young kids, and it was a wild time. It was a wild time. And I remember vividly, we were in Arizona, and this was a little bit different because Tanner Jeannot actually had come out and taken warmups with the team before the game. He skated for warmups, and then we get word like last second that, oh, Tanner Jeannot's not playing. And he was on the roster report. He was supposed to play. He didn't. And we're like, oh no, this means a trade. But we had to wait the entire game. Mind you, this was another game where they were already, I believe, going 11-7 to start with.
Oh
So they were
gosh.
already down a forward, and then Janot's out. So now they're 10-7. And they, we're thinking we're going to get news of a trade any minute now. It took the entire game. Like the entire game was played before we knew what had happened. Obviously, Tanner ends up getting traded to Tampa. It was, and the Predators went on to win that game kind of miraculously. They won that game, but it was, I remember so clearly the vibe and the feeling in the locker room afterward was not, you would not have guessed that they won that game. I remember, Tanner was in the corner of the locker room in tears. Other guys are shaken up. Matt Duchene almost started crying during his post-game interview. Like, this stuff's tough. Like, yes, it's a
Yes.
business. It's a business, and you don't go into it blind. You know that it's always a possibility and it's a risky run, but it definitely affects these guys. And so I think that, that on top of the steaming pile of garbage that has been this season up to this point, I think, it's just, there's no way that doesn't affect them.
Yeah. Very tough. Coming up, we're going to hear what Andrew Brunette had to say about Gus Nyquist leaving the team. Also, we're going to talk about roster decisions that Andrew Brunette had to make sort of on the fly this weekend. We're going to tell you what we thought of the line decisions and what could be next for this Predators roster. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. If you are looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I personally am a no shells variety kind of snacker. It's the perfect grab and go for busy days, whether I am sitting here at my desk working or if I'm driving down to Bridgestone Arena or I just know I need a little protein boost. They are a great go to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, they have an in shell option that is a classic favorite. So get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, Emma. Of course, like we said, Gus Nyquist did not dress for the New York Islanders game. The trade was announced during the game. He is with the Minnesota Wild. But I just wanted to play. This is what Andrew Brunette had to say post game about Nyquist and what Minnesota was getting when they decided to trade and get this veteran.
They're getting a real good player, real good smart player, very versatile, can play in any role on your team. You're getting one of the best teammates you'll ever find and one of the best people. So they're lucky to get him, and hopefully he plays up to what he can bring.
Yeah, that's just painful because when you hear that, you know that that's pretty accurate. No, Gus Nyquist hasn't had the season this season that he had last season, but this is a guy that you know what you're going to get from him. You know the kind of person that he is. You know the kind of leader that he is. And because of the way this season has gone, Gus Nyquist is now at the Minnesota Wild. Ugh. When you
I
go ahead.
feel like that's the part that hurts the most about this, that stings the most about this, because and by you, I mean kind of the royal you, but also the team, the guys know if they had played better, if they had lived up to their end of the bargain, he would still be on that team. Because based on what happened last year with Barry Trotz, look at, what happened with Alexander Carrier, for example. He was a guy getting a lot of interest at the trade deadline. Didn't trade him, though, because the Predators were still in shouting distance of a playoff spot. And he wasn't going to rock the boat. He wasn't going to sell. And so they knew if they had lived up to their end of the bargain, Barry would not be selling. And I'm not saying that trading Gus is necessarily like fire sale, because that was a very obvious trade candidate, but still,
Right.
if this team was in a playoff spot, Gus would have been like, he would have been playing such an important role that Barry Trotz wouldn't have. Maybe not that he definitely wouldn't have moved him, but he probably wouldn't have moved him.
Yeah. If the Predators, I agree with that. I think Barry Trotz has said, give me a reason to buy at the deadline. I mean, he told the team, give me a reason. Show me that this is a team that is worth investing in at the deadline. And they couldn't do it. And, you know, why they couldn't do it, that's going to be a whole string of podcasts for a whole string of other days because woof, they couldn't do it. But yeah, you know, Chris Mason talked about it during the Islanders game. And he's like, there is a part of you that feels like I have let my teammate down. Because if this team was in a different position in the standings and in the postseason conversation, this move may not have happened. It's tough. Yes, it's a business. It's still tough. And I think probably the gastrointestinal system of the Nashville Predators players has not settled down any because I think this could be the first of several moves that Barry Trotz could make depending on the phone calls that he gets. But before we get into that, Emma, what did you think of the decisions in the lineup? Of course, the Predators recalled Jake Lucchini from Milwaukee. They also recalled Spencer Stastny, who we didn't see until the Rangers game. But what did you think just of how he kind of pieced together the forwards?
I mean, look, you gotta there. It's not like you have a ton of options there, really. I mean, we saw you get the last minute kind of news that Gus isn't going to be in the lineup, and then you also have, Jankowski's injured, LaRue is injured. You've got Yossi on the back end who's out. He goes to IR. It's tough. There's not a ton that you can do with that. And I mean, we did see some interesting combinations, especially with the forwards. We saw some very interesting combinations at one point, where we had a top line Cole Smith and a second line Colton Sissons, and there was a whole lot going on out there.
Yeah.
But again, you know what? I almost kind of give him credit. It's like, hey, at this point, sure, like what, whatever, like just try put guys, in more elevated positions, see what they can handle. It's just, yeah, I mean, both of those games though were just really tough to watch, and
They were brutal.
for a variety of reasons. The line combinations were far from the only, or even the leading cause of frustration during those games. But yeah, it was a rough weekend.
It's hard too because even at this point in the season, you don't have a line that you can say, you know what, we've got one line going. Last season, no matter what was happening with the other three lines, you had Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist going. Well, that ship has so sailed. But there aren't even really two players that you put together and say, you know what, we can build something off of these two players. And I'm talking about Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, but also further down the line. I mean, truly, thank God for Michael McCarron and Cole Smith. That's about your best chemistry, work well together. You know what you're going to get from them, and you can pop somebody in that line as well. Kiefer
Yeah,
Bellows
and
in as well.
I think that's an important point to harp on for a second too, because when you're saying like Cole Smith and Michael McCarron, are they your highest upside pairing? No. Like if you put them out there, they don't have the highest ceiling when it comes to goal scoring potential. But if you want dependability and knowing what you're going to get and just feeling safe and feeling secure with them out there, then you're right. That's it. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand is like, well, what do you mean Michael McCarron and Cole Smith? They don't score goals. That's not what we're talking about. Right now, no one on this team is scoring goals.
That's right. That's right.
Right now, that's not what we're talking about. It just has to do with like the comfort level and not feeling like your entire forward group is a complete liability out there. And right now, yeah, it's Michael McCarron and Cole Smith. And you know what? We're talking about guys who might be gone by the end of the week.
Girl. I literally was like, hey, Cole Smith, suck a little bit this weekend because now everybody's looking. And I thought Cole Smith was one of the better players this weekend. But yeah, if you're talking about consistently knowing what you are going to get, those are the two forwards that you consistently know what you're going to get. Is it glamorous? Maybe no. Is it high scoring offense? No. But you know exactly what you're going to get. And the inconsistency from the other forwards up and down the lineup, this has been a problem all season long. So Andrew Brunette is going to be doing absolute scribbling when it comes to piecing together lineups through Friday, because who knows what's going to happen, but even the rest of the season, because at this point in the season, the Nashville Predators don't have a line with chemistry. They don't have it.
Nope.
I can't believe we're saying this.
Not a single one.
No. Nothing. Coming up, we are going to dig into the rotten meat that was the two games back to back against the Islanders, against the Rangers. The Predators lost both. Emma and I worked really hard. We do have one bright spot that we'll talk about. Of course, if you have listened to the show before, you have heard Emma and I raving about our Locked On Predators insiders, and we want you to join our great subtext community. It is an opportunity to text with Emma and I beyond the podcast about things like potential trades, thoughts on lineup decisions, and of course, your reaction to breaking news. We had a lot of texts going back and forth over Gus Nyquist getting pulled out of the lineup this weekend. If you want to learn more about becoming an insider, you can check out all the information you need in the link in our bio or check out the description of this episode. Emma, we mentioned, of course, Jake Lucchini was recalled. Spencer Stasny was recalled. Kiefer Bellows got into the lineup. But let's just start on what I like to call a Mary Poppins note. Friends, I'd like to welcome you to Locked On Mark Del Gaizo podcast. Because Mark Del Gaizo, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, where have you been? And I understand Del Gaizo had a rough game before he was sent back to Milwaukee. Mark Del Gaizo has wasted zero time. Feeling bad about it, feeling sorry for himself. He has gone down to Milwaukee. He has worked his tail off. He has been so good, y'all, down in Milwaukee, and got his opportunity again. And we got to celebrate Mark Del Gaizo's first NHL goal. Now, remember, he scored another goal and they took it away from him. But couldn't take this one back. Mark Del Gaizo got his first NHL goal. So for me, Emma, the weekend wasn't a total waste. It was a total loss. It wasn't a total waste.
Yeah, and you love that, he scored his first goal on Long Island. He's a native of New Jersey, so his parents and his brother were both there. Got to see that in person, which is so nice. And it's like the hockey gods are finally doing something right, because if you will all recall, his parents were unable to make it to his NHL debut last season.
Oh, Emma.
And then I asked him about it afterwards and I made him cry. And you know what? I still feel bad about that. And so now the fact that, okay, they didn't make it to his debut, but they made it to his first NHL goal. It's not the first time they've seen him play in the NHL, but the fact that they were there, so special. We love that. He also, and I know that, we're biased here at the Locked On Mark Del Gaizo podcast, but he was one of their better players this whole weekend, like by a lot. And I think that he had the goal in the Islanders game. In the Rangers game, he led the team with 6 shots on goal. Like, okay, Mark Del Gaizo, he had a couple really good looks there too.
Yeah.
He and Luke Shen, I think, still make a really, really effective pairing on the back end. And again, the Rangers game, they went 11-7. Fedor Svechkov was the healthy scratch, which I actually didn't hate that move. He had kind of a rough minute. Yeah. Give him a minute. So, I thought that, if we're scraping the bottom of the barrel to find any shred of positivity from this weekend, I would say that's one.
Yep. Thank you, Mark Del Gaizo, for bringing a little bit of joy back to Mary Poppins / Hannibal Lecter's heart. But we are not biased, Emma. We are actually not biased because our assessment that Mark Del Gaizo was one of the best players was actually shared by head coach Andrew Burnett, especially after that Islanders game. This is what Andrew Burnett had to say about Del Gaizo after Saturday's game, and we're going to hear from Del Gaizo himself.
Yeah, he's come up, play really well. He's hungry. He wants it for the back end. He was our best guy by far. He stepped up his game. He's a player that came ready to play today, and there wasn't many.
Yeah, it feels good. Definitely, it's been a long time coming. Feel like I just haven't been rewarded for some of my chances when I've been up here, so definitely feels good.
I think that is a great assessment. Mark Del Gaizo has not been rewarded for some of his chances. And look, this is the one thing that Emma and I have said about him. This is somebody who's going to kick off offense. He may not be the player that Roman Yossi and scores all of the goals, but he is going to get that puck to the net. I love the fact that he scored and also had a great shot that Cole Smith tipped in as well. So you do love to see that. I do want to ask you, Emma, because I know you have some big Hannibal Lecter feelings about this. We're going to talk about the New York Rangers game for a minute, which, of course, again, Nashville Predators lost. And here's the other thing I'll say before we pivot to you. UC Saros and Eustace Ananen hung out to dry again like Amish laundry in Lancaster, PA. Woof. So rough.
Yep.
Just
don't come at me for either one of those games and tell me that goaltending was the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's all we're going to say about that, because that's all the patience we have for that. But Emma, let's talk about the moment in the Rangers game that made you and I go, what? What? So, Matt Rempe, bless your heart, however many feet up in the air it lives, had a hit on Nick Blankenburg. And then Andreas Englund was like, oh, I don't think so, Satan. And they dropped gloves, and then we had a whole thing. Emma, what is your take on that sequence?
Where do I begin?
I mean, girl.
I have thoughts. So Matt Rempe and you know, we talked about this a little bit too. There is a size discrepancy for sure between him and Nick Blankenburg. However, you know, big, small, in between, doesn't matter. When you take your hand off of the stick to elbow another player in the chin, it caught him directly in the chin, sent him head first into the boards. Again, I'm not saying for sure it should have been a major, like just by immediately looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of hit that you review. As an official, you review that. You review that hit because it involved, again, took his hand off of the stick to go for Blankenburg's head. Then maybe he didn't, again, because of the size discrepancy, maybe he wasn't aiming for the head. Maybe he was trying to get the shoulder, but caught him in the face. Doesn't matter. Again, we talked about this with the Zach LaRue thing. Mm-hmm. Intentionality does not matter. Nope. I don't care. Maybe he was trying to give him a high five. I don't care. He still hit him in the face. So that's why, you know, you need to review that, especially when it is a player like Matt Rempe with an extensive history of suspensions at the NHL level. Now, the result of all this, you laid out what happened. So when all was said and done, Rempe got 2 minutes for elbowing and 5 minutes for fighting. Andreas Englund got 5 for fighting, 2 for instigating, and a 10-minute misconduct. Now, I understand the 10-minute misconduct automatically comes with the instigator, but where as you would say, the hitch in the giddy up for me with this is that let's talk about the instigator for a second, because the instigator would mean you are going after a defenseless player or an unwilling participant. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure Rempe's gloves were off before England got like I don't think this was an unwilling participant. Mm-hmm. And also, given everything that had happened to lead up to that moment, it wasn't completely unprompted either. So again, I just thought, again, it just seemed like, and then later on in the game, the refs missed a blatant elbow from Alexi Lafreniere in Luke Evangelista's face, didn't call that. And they're calling everything on the Predators now. I'm like, I'm not one to usually complain about officiating. I know they have a hard job. However, I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm not saying, oh, that should be a penalty, that should be a major, that should be this, that should be that. But I'm saying review it. Like, that's the kind of thing warrants an extra review. And if you do the review and you determine that it doesn't warrant a major penalty, fine. Whatever. At least you've done your due diligence. I may not agree with the outcome, but I can't disagree with the process you took to get there. So that's the issue that I have with it. It's like, it is incredibly dangerous. And I host the Wraparound podcast over at the Hockey News, and my co-host Michael Agello and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. Well, I guess probably a couple months ago now. Whenever the last time did was, one of the several times we were talking about this, and yes, he's an enforcer, but there are other enforcers in this league that don't do the dangerous things that he does. And why, is he so dangerous? And Michael brought up a good point. I think you share this belief, Anne, and I think it's a good point that he is so large. He is such a large human that he does not have control of his limbs. And it's becoming dangerous. Like, some of the hits that he makes, you see other enforcers, guys like Tom Wilson or, whoever, they can make those hits or those plays. And they send a message for sure, but they're not as dangerous. And I think that Rempe, with a guy like Rempe, until you can learn to have control over your own body and your own limbs, then don't be making those dangerous plays, because then it really does start to come off like intent to injure. And then let's not keep celebrating him for doing this stuff. I mean, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I feel for him in the sense that somebody has to coach him better. And you mentioned Zach LaRue. Look, we know that Zach LaRue has been suspended for a hit, and Zach LaRue has to learn. You have to be coached. Look, this is acceptable and this is not. And you cannot continue to play in a way that is unacceptable. And I don't care whether I'm talking about Rempe. I don't care if I'm talking about Zach LaRue. Coach him how to do it. If you are okay with that, if that is the role you want him to play, coach him how to do it. Help him help you.
The height difference thing is a perfect example, because yes, maybe he could take that same exact hit on Michael McCarron, and it's nothing. It's nothing because it hits him in the shoulder, whatever. Right. But that's the coaching part. That's the part where you have to train him to be like, hey man, not everyone out there is the same size as you. In fact, most of them aren't. So we need to be a little bit more intentional with where we're laying these hits. I'm not saying don't hit people. That's your game. That's what you do. I get it. But you have to be more intentional about the way that you go about it, because when you are this reckless in the way that you throw your body around, and that's a lot of body to throw around, it does become dangerous. And it's not in line with, kind of the integrity of the game, I don't think, anymore, because at that point, it just looks like you are trying to hurt people. If it had been called a 5-minute major, then that's an automatic review, automatic official review.
Correct.
That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. Just get the automatic review. It was a player in a defenseless position, hit him in the head, sent him head first into the boards. Now, I do think the fact that, kind of miraculously, that Blankenberg stayed in the game.
Oh my gosh.
Probably, I don't know, maybe the outcome would have been different if he was down for a long time, if he ended up coming out of the game, like maybe they would have done something about it, but it doesn't matter because it's still dangerous. Like, it's like you said, I may not agree with the outcome, but that's the kind of thing you review. And I know Predators fans and those of us who cover the team are a little bit more on edge about this sort of thing because we just had a similar thing with Roman Josi happening, whereas a dangerous hit from Sam Bennett from behind didn't get reviewed. And and now the Predators are without their captain for week to week, potentially for the rest of the year. So we're a little bit on edge about this, but I think we have a right to be because it just seems like the Predators have been on the losing end of these things for far too long. And this isn't even just about the Predators getting treated fairly
Just
or
in
unfairly.
general.
This is just player safety. This is just like a blanket statement that like we should, if we actually care about the safety of our players as much as we claim to, then let's actually put our money where our mouth is and review those dangerous plays.
I saw somebody, bless their heart, somebody clearly a Rangers fan was like, oh, he fell over like WWE. I'm like, let me tell you some things about Nick Blankenburg. Nick Blankenburg, if his foot was caught in a bear trap, he would chew it off and skate on one skate and stay in the game. That's just who Nick Blankenburg is not coming off the ice. That should be reviewed regardless of whether the player gets up or not. That's where we stand. We are anti-head injury, pro, call the 5-minute and review it. May the world change. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to preview the game against Boston. It's going to be fabulous. So make sure you tune in on tomorrow's show. And we're going to prep you for, we don't know what. Do you remember 84 years ago when the Nashville Predators beat the Winnipeg Jets? 84 years ago.
84 years ago. Yes.
84 years ago.
That big penalty kill, that was fun. That was approximately, 84 years ago.
I vaguely remember it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But tomorrow's a new day and really it's a crapshoot. So make sure you join us tomorrow as we preview that game. Before we sign off on this Monday, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day and not minding that maybe there wasn't a Hawk to miss on today's episode. Come back tomorrow. We'll let you know what the Preds need to do against Boston. And we'll be so chipper then you won't even be able to stand us. We'll see you then.